That's the problem with the whole system. It's privatizing gain and socializing risk. But here's the deal. Well, CalPERS, for starters, and CalPERS, one of the interesting things about CalPERS is it's a government agency that invests an amazing amount of money, right? Billions and billions of dollars, and yet it's run almost entirely. The board members are, the elected and appointed board members are almost all government employees or retirees, and the elected officials on the board are almost all elected by government employees and retirees. So you have a pretty good guess that they're making decisions based on what's best for government employees and retirees, and the taxpayer doesn't really have anything to do with it. But one of the things they do find that CalPERS is good at is providing actuarial data, because they at least need to know how much unfunded liability and debt that they're inflicting on taxpayers. Even if their political lobbying tries to cover all of that up. And this life expectancy issue is really hilarious, because police and firefighters for years have made a cottage industry out of saying, well, we get these super generous retirements, okay, maybe they are generous, but we die 3 to 5 years after retiring because our jobs are so risky, so dangerous that we die. So that's why we get, so that we can enjoy the last couple, 3, 5 years of our lives in comfort. That's what they say. I was on the Stossel show, and that's what one of the union people said. Problem is, CalPERS provided me with all the data, and the truth is the longest living employee of any type is a police officer, followed close behind by, you guessed it, a firefighter. They live to be in their mid-80s, and they live longer than what are called miscellaneous workers, which is everybody else in the government system, and they live longer than most of the rest of us. And so they don't live 3 to 5 years after retiring. They tend to retire at age 50 to in their low 50s, and they live to be in their mid-80s. They lived 35 years beyond retirement.
And I imagine that's because these are, obviously they're dangerous professions. There's certain risks there, but there's risks in every profession. But these are typically people who are in good shape. If you're going to be a firefighter or a police officer, okay, maybe cops eat a lot of donuts, but as opposed to the average state employee who might just be sitting in front of a computer or sitting at a desk all day, these people are going to be probably healthier, and then getting a nice retirement pension and getting all your medical bills paid for, that certainly helps when we're talking about longevity too.
Well, I don't think there's much evidence of what the first part of what you said, but a lot of it is the earlier you retire, with the more money you have, the longer you tend to live. It just tends to be, and they retire really early, and they get an amazing, retirement, 6-figure retirements guaranteed for them and their spouses for the rest of their life. In fact, they live so long, and the taxpayers on the hook for so much of this. And of course, I always have the caveat, I wish everyone a long and healthy life. I'm not wishing early death on anybody. It's just we have to look at, the actuaries have to look at these tables. And there's something now called the Viagra effect. It's a real term. So you've got a 50-something police or fire retiree marrying a 30-something. And the taxpayer's on the hook until that 30-something passes away.
Sure.
These becomes extremely expensive in many cases. With the $100,000 to $200,000 retirements, which are common, we could look at the $100,000 pension club in California. Basically, these are millionaires' retirements. If you and I had an annuity or savings, we would have to have $4 to $8 million in the bank to be able to retire like that. So we're making these people millionaires. And in terms of dangerous professions, these obviously they're jobs that have occasional dangers, but the Bureau of Labor Statistics, police and fire are not even in the top dozen. These are not. It's not. These jobs are not nearly as dangerous as roofers or fishermen or loggers or taxi cab drivers. Not nearly.
How about trash collectors? Usually up near the top of that list. I don't think any trash collector is getting a 6-figure pension, and most of them are not getting any of the perks that we're handing out to the firefighters and police officers either.
Well, right. So this whole thing. Look, this whole idea that they're heroes. What they are very highly paid people who've decided to weigh whatever risks are available, and decide that yes, I will somehow sacrifice and take the median pay for a firefighter in California. Pay and benefit package is $175,000, not counting unfunded liabilities. So yes, I'll suffer and take $175,000 a year to do a job that has 3 days on and the rest of 2 weeks off. Obviously they're paid for sleeping. So we're talking about a really good deal, which is why there are 22,000 applicants for every firefighter opening. So this isn't they just use this to exploit the public. And like I said, I got my numbers from CalPERS. So they even have a presentation about the myth of the early death. So they know. And police and fire do not, die early deaths. In fact, quite the opposite. Now, the other thing is they'll say, you'll see police and fire say, well, look, we get disabled on the job at such higher rates than everybody else. Well, that's right. That's because disability has become something of a scam. We have something that Sacramento Bee coined the term, and their liberal editorial page, they coined the term chief's disease because virtually every police chief in California retires with a disability. Where if you and I, as reporters, if we got a disability, it would be very hard to get. It would be treated. It would be treated like an insurance type of thing, and insurers, aren't apt to give out millions of dollars in benefits without making sure you're really disabled.
We get angry about this just because we're jealous. That's what we should be saying here.
Well,
we're not going to get, you and I, the reporters are not going to get the
whether we're jealous or not, there's still the fact. And then the thing is, in the government system, the disability is made by fellow government workers and retirees on these retirement system boards, and you almost always get the disability. So there was, one police chief who dropped his briefcase on his toe. There are departments where everybody somehow gets irritable bowel syndrome. Anything. So basically, disability has become not for everyone. Almost all chiefs, maybe 2/3 rank and file officers. It's become like an entitlement, so they view that, and that's because it's another thing that the study doesn't point to, but it could go on this list. It's a gimmick. It's a way to force taxpayers to pay for even earlier retirement. And also, by the way, if you get a disability, it protects half of your earnings from taxes. So you don't even have to pay taxes on it.
Sounds like a pretty sweet deal if you can get it. You touched on the fact that this is a gimmick, and that brings us back around to the beginning of the conversation here. Just a couple minutes left, Steve. But let's talk about something else you sort of touched on there during that last bit, and that is that the people that are making these decisions in California and in most other states, they're people who are public employees. They're sitting on boards making these types of determinations, and they're looking out for their own. They're looking out for their fellow public employees. They're all on the same team. And that is just one reason. We could spend all day, and we'll have to revisit this, I think, on a later podcast, but the fact that there's so many political incentives lined up to allow these gimmicks to exist. I mean, they didn't just pop into existence. State budgets aren't just being caved in by these pension gimmicks simply because politicians and policymakers and budget makers don't know how to balance a budget or don't understand that this is a problem. But the reasons these things exist is because there are a lot of incentives that align for the public workers, for the people on the retirement boards, and for the politicians that are making the state budgets to go along with these things. And whether we're talking about shortchanging the pension fund, whether we're talking about pension obligation bonds to hide how bad the unfunded liability is, whether we're talking about projected future growth rates that aren't realistic, whether we're talking about people who are getting benefits, who are projected to, die 5 years after they retire, who are going to live for 30. All of these things come into being because of the political process that is inherent in these public sector pensions.
Well, right, and it seems like conflicts of interest. I mean, I live in Sacramento, outside Sacramento. It's government central, right? And I saw they're campaigning. There are people campaigning to be on the board of CalPERS, and you should see the campaign signs. I mean, they're campaigning to do all these things that we think are terrible, right? They're campaigning to put the union first. So how could the taxpayer even have a chance in a system that actively encourages, the person who most ingratiates themselves to the union membership is the folks that win the election on those elected seats. And of course, the people who get as much union aid as they can end up being the elected officials that serve on the board. So it is really amazing. And now the other thing is, these bills that expand a lot of these things, it's like drip, drip, drip. It happens slowly and quietly, and we don't see it happening because the public doesn't have a big debate over every time these little expansions, playing around with discount rates, and these bills that get passed, like the ones that make it easier for. Like I just saw one, this little bill nobody was talking about that made it easier for lifeguards to get heftier benefits and passed overwhelmingly. Nobody even, it's just quiet little bills that move forward. So it's like rust, it never sleeps. And we end up with more and more and more, and then it becomes almost impossible to unravel it all. And that's where we are. And all the legal cases, the legislative situation, it's basically rigged. I mean, we can't do anything about it.
Yeah, it's very difficult to undo it, perhaps impossible to undo it, and there's only one place for the taxpayer in this entire process, Steve, and that is just pay into it. That's all. We just want your money. You don't need to say anything about it. You don't need to know what we're doing. We just want your money. Just keep funneling it in. That is unfortunately all the time we have for today, though, but this has been Breaking the Piggy Bank. I am Eric Boehm. He is Steve Greenhut. Thanks to our special guest, Joe Lupino Esposito, who was here. He's the editor and general counsel for StateBudgetSolutions.org. You can catch this podcast, other earlier editions of this podcast. Go back and listen to Steve and I talk about pensions and all of these pension gimmicks over and over again. The previous editions of Breaking the Bank and all of our other Watchdog podcasts are available at watchdog.org and on iTunes and Stitcher. Go to watchdog.org/iTunes, watchdog.org/Stitcher. And thanks for listening. Once again, I'm Eric Boehm for Watchdog Radio. Check us out online, watchdog.org, and find us right here again next week. Thanks.